As anyone who's been around my channel for long enough will know, I adore the Baldur's Gate series. When I first made my channel when I was 16, I called myself Ballspawn for crying out loud. I've had these games since I was little. Hell, I got the second one for my birthday in a big box set, which I still have somewhere. I've adored it and replayed it many times. I was excited when the enhanced editions came out because, while the Beamdog characters weren't very good, a few of them were fun and I could at least just use my usual band of friends anyway. While there had been rumblings from BioWare, Black Isle, and Beamdog about doing a Baldur's Gate 3 at different points, it always felt like a bad move story-wise. The Ward and Imoen's journey was over. What else could they do? I mean, they both wanted a quiet life anyway. That didn't stop multiple devs wanting to make it, though. The license to make Baldur's Gate 3 was like the holy grail for old CRPG developers. BioWare, Obsidian, Beamdog, and inXile made bids for it multiple times, and indeed Beamdog was given permission to make Siege of Dragonspear, a midquel between Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, effectively completing the trilogy. But for a game actually billed 3, they instead got outbid by Larian Studios of all people. That's out of the blue. That's one step below Beamdog. And this was the second time BioWare lost one of their flagship games to a developer whose entire career is making a pantomime of their work. As somebody who adored the first two games, I feel like I'm watching in real time what it must have felt like to watch the Fallout franchise be given to the empty sandbox guys. Look, Larian are fine devs. I mean, they're not bad. They were just a wrong fit. Their entire library is sucking the Infinity Engine's teat, and anyone familiar with the gameplay of old CRPGs will tell you that it's at best tolerable and at worst cancerous. And I've played Larian's games, and I will say they are definitely faithful to the CRPGs of old. And I'm not saying it's bad, it's just weird. It's like watching fan fiction get published. Even the early companions feel like original character do not steal versions of Shartil, Viconia, Hexat, Edwin, and Keltorn. Like, Hexat and Astarion are literally the same fucking character, like, cause she was already a fanfiction version of Viconia. The only difference is Astarion is uglier and voiced by Stewie Griffin. This gets even more hilarious when the actual Baldur's Gate characters show up later on with new meme voices and also having the fanfiction approach to their characterization. I mean, seeing what they did with these old friends makes me glad the Ward and Imoen are conveniently nowhere to be seen, probably off hiding in TC Dale's house. Oh, come on, Lily, it can't be that bad. It's not bad, it's just not Baldur's Gate. It's a D&D game with Baldur's Gate's name and some of its characters awkwardly bolted on. If you've played any other RPG since, like, I don't know, Fallout 3, you've played this one, it's just bigger and hornier. But actually, the horny was what I wanted to talk about. That whole tirade was just so YouTube doesn't fuck me on monetization. Well, granted, I don't want to talk about the horny in particular. I'm too old for video game sex to really have any impact on me. I meant all the discourse surrounding Baldur's Gate 3 and the fact that you can turn your camp into one big orgy got me thinking about video game romance, because romance has been a part of CRPGs for decades at this point. What was once a staple of BioWare has just become such a standard that even the Persona games are drinking out of BioWare's mug. But Baldur's Gate 2 was actually the first. Well, not the first. Games had dynamic romance for a while before it, but the modern style of romance as a verb that games use, where your companions have special little quests and variables to track, and it becomes part of their personal character story, first hatched in Baldur's Gate 2. And BG2 being the first foray into what would become a standard is actually interesting, because it's before the tropes and cliches of video game romance were codified. Hell, it's before video game romance became a glorified dating sim. The thing about Baldur's Gate 2 is that it had to work within the confines of the Infinity Engine's approach to gameplay. This is simultaneously a curse and a blessing, as the game doesn't have a separation between adventuring and character moments. A conversation about your relationship can start at any time as long as you aren't currently in combat. So you could be crawling through the depths of the Underdark and suddenly Jaheria goes, "So hey, about last night," and you're just like, "What do you mean about last night, Jaheria? You mean last night when I turned into a slavering beast and attacked everyone?" In all honesty, I have mixed feelings about the modern style of talking to characters in the camp. Only time I found it worked was in BioWare's 2 space games, where at least there's the internal justification of the fact that space travel takes a while, leading to obvious downtime between missions. That Mass Effect has so far had the best romance storylines in an RPG certainly doesn't hurt either. But Baldur's Gate 2 love talks just happen right there, while walking through a forest, in a crypt, even in a pitched battle for one's own life. This is because love talks happen on timers, and when the timer ticks down and the previous conditions are met, bam, there we go. If you're in combat when it happens, the conversation will initiate the same frame the combat ends. This is something even mods can't get away from. Some of the more famous romance mods for Baldur's Gate have to work within this restriction. One mod rather infamously tried to use force talking, where you use the dialogue action to initiate conversations yourself as a core mechanic before an update years later just flat out removed it for being clunky and weird. When the conversations line up in actual downtime, it's beautiful. When it happens seconds after a pitched battle for your life, it feels out of place and awkward. Like, "Hey, I need to talk to you about what Irenicus made this Duragar do. I'm a little busy at the moment, but in a way I find that kind of charming. Standing knee-deep in corpses is about as good good a time to let your feelings out as any when you're a ball spawn. It reinforces something that's always present among the recurring characters in Baldur's Gate, is that their psyche is damaged. They're not okay, and their adventures only throw more pressure onto them. And that's reflected in most of the romance paths available in the game, and even through modding, because they're all traumatized. The actual romance options themselves, however, are nothing short of strange. BioWare RPGs are rather infamous for having many romance options available, but having only really done any work on about 2 or 3. Knights of the Old Republic had one option for each available gender, with a little Juhani on the side if you're feeling gal pally. The Mass Effect series had a plethora of romance options available, but only Liara, Garrus, and Tali were given any real consideration. The Old Republic returns to having only 1 or 2 options per gender, depending on the class, but halfway through the game, the real romance options in Theron, Sean, and Lana Beniko show themselves to be the ones most intently worked on. These are characters that are always your best friends, the ones you're closest to, oftentimes the first real party member you have. Baldur's Gate 2 is unique in that it doesn't have a Garrus, a Lana, or a Karth. Well, it does, but they're not available for, let's say, plot reasons. The actual romance options available are all different flavors of kinda messed up. Like the player, everyone you travel with is damaged in some way, either by grief, isolation, or prejudice, and their romance is just as messy as they are. The first of them is Jaheria, which in my opinion is the creepiest romance available in both the game and in mods, and that's saying a lot when you think about it. Jaheria is Gorian's friend. She knew your father since before you were born. Her and her husband traveled with you throughout the first game, assuming you kept them around, and they're with you right up until you get captured by Irenicus. There, Khalid is murdered and his corpse is used to torture Imoen. Throughout the first act of the game, Jaheria is wrought with grief and having nightmares about Khalid, but quickly those nightmares start pushing her toward considering a new relationship. It's presented as Khalid's spirit giving his blessing for Jaheria to move on, but comes off more like a grief-induced rebound. Given that Jaheria is a mentor figure for the player, the whole situation comes off as creepy and cold. It's hard to tell who to judge more, honestly, the player for taking advantage of a grieving widow, or Jaheria for rebounding onto her friend's child. But almost every romance is like this, and in a way it's almost charming compared to modern RPGs, practically lining up a selection of waifus and wooden spoons to bite down on. The romance with Jaheria is messy and strange and borderline creepy at times, but these are not people living a typical life. This is a child of a murder god who is forced to fight for their life at every moment, and who passively inflicts their own trauma onto their friends. During this time, you have just broken out of a madman's torture chamber and are traveling the land trying to find enough gold to rescue your friend who is still in his clutches. These aren't ordinary situations to be in, and most of them are just making the best of a bad situation. Like, just imagine being Imoen getting rescued after months spent in Spellhold and finding out your buddy's shacked up with the team mom. While it's certainly a situation I would advise anyone against indulging in, it certainly makes for an interesting story. Romance as a genre has become synonymous with titillation, offering either a cheap plot for porn or indulging in some weird fetish. But romance as an exploration of characters, particularly characters who are in bad situations and might crack under the stress, is decidedly underrated, though these kind of stories are rare and involve pushing past the initial squick, which I don't begrudge anyone for being unable to do. This is what the phrase dark romance used to mean, and I used to adore it, but for different reasons than I enjoy real romance. Jaheria's romance is certainly the one with the most time and effort put into it, eclipsed in content only by a single mod, and is the one the player is subtly nudged toward, given that Jaheria is the only romanceable party member that starts the game in the party. And the game ignores your previous party from an imported save to put Imoen, Jaheria, and Minsk into the party. Jaheria's baggage isn't even a dark past. Her husband was a party member in the first game, then you find him dead on a table in a second. As she's grieving and looking for consolation, she rather unexpectedly ends up falling for the ward. And if you think that's weird, she does too. She spends most of the arc being extremely hesitant about it. She's not the only Baldur's Gate 1 character to be romanceable, however. Viconia can be recruited later in the game and is available as a romance option, and in my opinion, she's actually the most well-written simply by virtue of not having the baggage that the other characters have. She's mean and harsh and sexually aggressive, but she's also just an adult who knows what she likes. Being a drow, she comes from a militantly matriarchal society, so she only has any real respect for the player if they're difficult. If you sleep with her right away, she loses interest because you weren't a challenge. She's after someone she can fight with, and fight with well. You have to really think about her character, and lucky enough, her character is interesting and complex enough to require thinking about. Viconia is almost like a trap for people who are just after a harsh, angry waifu. The kind of people who write revenge porn of Sylvanas Windrunner because they don't like the fact that she's mean. Indeed, she has a lot of similarities to Sylvanas. If you're too much of a simp, she loses interest. If you try to play the I can fix her line, she loses interest. You have to be the kind of person that a drow woman would find attractive, which is made even more difficult because Viconia is a chaotic neutral character who was nonetheless given the alignment of neutral evil entirely because drow lore in the 2000s was really stupid and racist. RPG romance usually works by playing to ego. If you're nice, they like you. Viconia is one of the few examples where an expectation of success isn't present, so there are many paths where it just doesn't work out, and those paths are all equally satisfying. The same trauma-based character work isn't here like it is with Jaheria, but the trade-off is that it's a lot more difficult because Viconia isn't emotionally compromised. Viconia is the closest to a normal romance you can have in this game, and that's all the more pronounced by the the fact that it isn't normal. She knows what she likes, and if you're not it, she's not interested. It's for this reason that Viconia is tied with Imoen for my favorite character in the series, because she's just so radically different from every other party member that just bantering with her is fun, even if you get locked out of the romance. Then there's Aerie, and while Viconia felt like a trap for the kind of pathetic sack of shit whose first response to a harsh woman is, I can fix her, Aerie's romance feels like it was written by the most greasy weeb I've ever seen. Like Viconia, she'll break things off if you sleep with her too quickly, but on account of things moving too fast. And at all other times, she's a doe-eyed innocent girl who doesn't know what sex even is. Like the player, she's barely an adult, but unlike the player, she is only just starting to venture off on her own when she joins the party. Forming a relationship with Aerie is like being on the other side of the romance with Jaheria, and you just feel like a predator doing it. Unfortunately, for some gamers, that is exactly what they want, a doe-eyed innocent waifu who is nothing but devoted to the player, regardless of their actions. And even people who claim to have spicier taste in romance always inevitably push characters into that role. It's been the MO for villain simps for a long time. Take a character, usually a white guy, who does awful things so you can claim to like villains, and then headcanon them as a poor little meow meow because you didn't actually like villains. The last of your available suitors is also the only available romance for a female character unless you mod the game or play the enhanced edition, Anomen. That Anomen is the only available option for female characters is itself a problem, and it's a problem that RPGs have had for a while as they start branching into allowing gay romance. The Mass Effect series rather notoriously had a single gay romance option per game, and for 2 of them it's just for femshep. In Mass Effect 3 it evens out to 2 for each, but for male Shepard, one of his romance options is potentially dead, and for most players he was, leaving Steve Cortez as the only romance option for a gay male Shepard. The problem is that when you only have one romance option, things get really dicey if you don't like that character. And Anomen is an easy character to hate. He's a deconstruction of the Paladin archetype, and a particularly weak one at that. Like most Paladin deconstructions, he's arrogant, somewhat bigoted, and talks to you like an overenthusiastic incel. He calls you milady and goes on big speeches about righteousness. Actually having a romance with this guy is just signing up to be Jaina Proudmoore. And the unfortunate truth is that Anomen's romance isn't all that complicated. If you like cultish Christian boys, this is the guy for you. If you don't, you basically get to eat shit. Sometimes the game bugs out and assumes you're in a relationship with him by the time you make it a spell hold. Anomen is only interesting if he fails his paladin test, at which point he's more relaxed and easygoing, and isn't such a stickler about everything. Most of his dialogue accounts for if he's passed or failed his test, except his conversations with Beamdog characters, which is a holdover from mods which tended to make Anomen more insufferable. It's a test of your patience if you have Nira or Hexat in the party, because he is just fucking disgusting. You know, a lot of characters are disgusting toward Hexat, actually. Oh, why, Lily? Because she's a vampire? Lord, do I wish. Unlike Jaheria, there's no hook to get past the squig. It's just, here's your knight in shining armor, hope you enjoy being talked down to the entire game, don't have other women in the party or shit's gonna get real gross real fast. It reeks of 2000s BioWare and of the all-male staff writers. In the Enhanced Edition, Beamdog added several new characters to the game, and while some of them had a romance enabled in Baldur's Gate 1, they don't really come into their own until Baldur's Gate 2. However, unlike the main game, their romances are decidedly thin on contact. It seems Dorn and Nira were the main focus for Beamdog. Dorn is the only real orc character you can add to your party, and Dorn himself is such a one-dimensional trope. He's a blackguard, Baldur's Gate's version of a Death Knight, and he's just an evil guy who does evil things evilly. He's there just to fill out the roster of evil romance previously held by Viconia, and only Viconia. But in stark contrast to the rest of Baldur's Gate characters, he's deceptively simple. Viconia is a character who, if you weren't told she was neutral evil, you wouldn't have pegged her as it. You'd probably assume she's chaotic neutral. Dorn is just after power and a fight and orc. If you wanted to fuck Garrosh Hellscream, this is the guy for you. In contrast, Nira is your manic pixie dream girl, and that's it. She's every teenager's first quirky OC, and when a teenager makes that character, it's cute, but when grown men and women do it, it's just plain creepy. And fucking hell, Nira's voice acting is worse than mine. She's obnoxiously earnest and babbles a lot about nothing. Everything about her is just one big trope. Of the 4, Hexat is the most bearable, but her romance is simultaneously the simplest and the shortest, which is a shame given that I honestly feel like it had the potential to be really interesting. Given that Hexat is a vampire, she has a hard time just existing in the world without drawing conflict. But the ward is a ball spawn who practically attracts violence wherever they go. She's a kindred spirit in this regard. I honestly think, given the ward's legacy, that either a vampire or another ball spawn are the only people who could really relate to her on such an intimate level. So a romance with Hexat finding solace in each other as creatures that can't feasibly exist is a good idea, especially as Hexat seems to lament the fact that she was turned in the first place. But in practice, it's just, hey, do you like me? Yes. Nice. The Beamdog characters feel at times like modern D&D fandom where party members are one-dimensional and obnoxiously typecast. It feels like Beamdog thought the idea of a bard who has 19 charisma and who bangs anything that moves is a workable character and not an overdone meme. This game stands out because as uncomfortable as things can get with the base game romance, they're at least interesting to write about. Well, Jaheria's was interesting to write about, but in general, most characters in Baldur's Gate are messy and traveling with the player has uprooted their lives and caused untold trauma. Even Viconia, the most stable, has her baggage. Indeed, some of the Beamdog characters suffer simply by virtue of the fact that their niche is already taken by better characters. Unless you're trying to sleep with her, there's really no reason to keep Nira in the party, unless you don't plan on taking Imoen, you monster. But even with the bad ones, a lot of them are still compelling on the basis that nobody is normal, everyone's got baggage. The nature of Baldur's Gate 2's sparse romance means that romance mods were going to inevitably be on the table. Some original characters, some characters that are returning, and like most mods, the vast majority of them aren't very good. But 3 mods always stood out for both their high quality and notoriety, as well as the fact that they're more like character expansions in general. The first of these mods is the Hairdalis romance by Aerie and Rahalia, which comes with a romance and friendship path for Hairdalis, a popular bard character, and gives about 2.5 hours worth of content. It's quite good if you like Hairdalis. I mean, I don't, but a lot of people do. The second is the Dearnese romance by Jay Compton and Kulyok, which offers a romance and friendship path, and also provides 4 hours of content with Nalia Dearnese, a noblewoman who, as a character, was always on the back foot because she was meant to be a replacement for a much more popular character who was supposed to die. And the third is Imoen romance by T.C. Dale, Israel Blar, and Vanatos that fully expands Imoen's character, gives her fully fledged party dialogue, contains both romance and friendship paths that stretch out through the entire campaign of Shadows of Amen Throne of Ball, and more fluff moments than you can shake a stick at, and totals at about 9 hours of content.
You hadn't handed yours in and I felt so pleased. I've done it. So I had mine. The next day Emma comes in with all 16 pages of hers.
The Hairdalis and Dearnese romance mods are quite good if you like those characters. They offer an expansion into those characters that the game was sorely lacking and offer an experience that fits in with the rest of the base game romance. The Imoen romance mod comes with 6 different trigger warnings and has a squick factor that rivals Jaheria, though personally I always found Jaheria to be the creepier of the two. Frankly, this last one has enough to talk about that it warrants its own video, because like Jaheria, it carries an interesting character study if you can push past the bits that weird you out. And like Viconia, it's one that carries a lot of ways to fail simply because the nature of the campaign means you're playing with fire. In all honesty, when you look at how romance in games has evolved over the years, mostly because of Mass Effect, Baldur's Gate 2 feels like such a vastly different beast. Even at their worst, the characters are all different and unique in ways that just doesn't happen in modern games, and some come with such baggage to them that as romance they creep me out, but as a story about characters making the best of a terrible situation, it compels me. I like stories about characters, especially characters in messy situations. I've loved them ever since I first played Baldur's Gate, and it's why I still hold affection for BioWare's style of storytelling. Getting to see characters in messy situations processing their feelings and making the best of it honestly makes some of the base game romance in Baldur's Gate, and a few of the mods available, some of the best times I've ever had with a game. And it's unique in that it never really happened again. The closest we got was maybe Garrus, but Garrus was a lot more tame. Making out with your ex-cop buddy is nothing. Making out with the team mom is like, okay, pump the brakes. How did you get to this point? I'm morbidly curious, tell me. I kinda like the fact that the more in-depth the romance is, the more bullshit it throws in your way. Games today tend to focus on romance entirely in the superficial. When Mass Effect Andromeda came out, I was streaming it, and the thing people said the most just as I was creating my character was, who are you going to bang? Like it was just inevitable. The answer was nobody, because the only character I liked wasn't available. What I like about Baldur's Gate 2 is that even at its most strange and kinda gross, it's always an interesting look into a character. Characters like Anomen and Aerie are hard passes for me because they're tropes of age like milk, but their characters are still compelling and they have their own struggles that are more complicated than just, I have a dark past. It's usually a dark present. Baldur's Gate 3 characters are like, ooh, look at me, I'm sassy and snarky like every character in everything ever. Maybe I'm hiding a dark secret. While Baldur's Gate 2 characters are like, I was tortured by a madman and had my soul ripped out of my body and now I'm withering away and will slowly die. It was an hour ago. You were there! He's the final boss! You're never dealing with people's past, you're always dealing with their present. Issues in the here and now that you're already aware of by virtue of the fact that you've seen it happen with your own eyes. You're not befriending someone until they tell you their tragic backstory. For one party member, rescuing them from the trauma prison of character development forms the entire first half of the game. Modern RPG romance is more focused on backstory because it's easier to write and add to a game, and as time has gone on, it's only gotten more watered down. In KOTOR, you can hear Karth's entire story and then help him find his missing son, and that takes place over most most of the game. In Mass Effect 2, you chat, do the loyalty mission, and then fuck to various degrees of quality and writing. And it's only become more flanderized from there. Characters are less complex, less interesting, less motivated as RPG romance becomes more and more of a formality, and leans itself more and more towards being a glorified dating sim with a collection of waifus. Granted, this is something I've just accepted about RPGs. I'm not saying this is some kind of degradation of the medium. I don't even blame Larian's writing for it. If the audience wants shameless fucking with a mind flayer, the audience should get shameless fucking with a mind flayer. I just kinda wish we could also have the messy character stuff that I like, and it's just not really a thing anymore, because that's just not why RPGs include romance in the current day. Yahtzee Croshaw suggested in a video specifically about Baldur's Gate 3 that the romance seems to be included for tradition, and indeed a lot of games have come across that way. Dragon Age and Mass Effect Andromeda certainly do, because you never get to have a real connection with someone, and it never really felt like they have any real ideas. Indeed, I always get this vibe from any game where almost every party member is bisexual by default, because it's the purest form of formality. Having characters with gender preferences is understandably frustrating if you like a character and they're only straight, but on the other hand, it tells me that they actually thought about how this character thinks and feels about things. There's a crewmate in Mass Effect 3, Samantha Trainer, who is explicitly gay and hooks up with Shepard during a chess game, but if Shepard is male, this happens.
And the other is interested in playing another game.
Such as? Oh.
Hey, I'm sorry. You seemed interested.
Oh, no, I apologize. I try to be friendly, but you're not really my type. Remember how I liked Edie's voice?
Oh. Sorry. I didn't realize.
Not at all. I can't wait to tell my friends that I broke Commander Shepard's heart and crushed him at chess.
Oh, really?
Unless you'd like to try to reclaim your honor.
Hell yes.
This is cute, especially given that Shepard just takes rejection on the chin. This feels far more like a character with her own wants and desires. As much as it might be frustrating that I can't romance Viconia as a woman, her sexuality is built into her character. She has thoughts and feelings on the matter. It works, and it's good because these are characters in a role-playing game, not a glorified dating sim. What's always bothered me, and will continue to bother me, is that kind of messy character stuff where you have to push past the squick to get to an interesting story about people that's less about player titillation and more about wanting these characters to be okay, has a version of itself that is almost perfect. But its squick factor is so high that not even Larian's Mind Flayer and Bear Sex come close to it. And it's the only one of its kind, so it's either deal with that problem or you're shit out of luck. Maybe I'll do a video on it. I guess I just miss long character stories. I wish RPG characters weren't designed to be pinups first and characters second all the time. I wish more thought was put into it other than, hey, you wanna fuck the tentacle guy? Lily, it kinda sounds like you want the video game version of Shape of Water, but like the actual movie and not the fish fucking memes made out of it. Yes, there it is, that's it. Fuck, why'd that take me so long? Hey all, thanks for making it through to the end. Yeah, this one got a little weird on me. I've been wanting to make a video on Baldur's Gate for quite a while now. It's like my original muse, so to speak. And pretty much since the release of Baldur's Gate 3, I've just gotten really back into the original games. I don't think Baldur's Gate 3 is bad, it's just Baldur's Gate 2 was better, and I find a lot of what it does is disappointing in some places. Let me know if you want me to do a video on that one mod and just curse you all with horrible knowledge. I do so enjoy tormenting you. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.